So this is class 76 on the golden doves. We're page 42. My goal here is to explain things properly, which is to say that I've taken some notes before the class, which I'm going to read to you. We're not going to be covering a lot of ground. Rather, I want to understand the material correctly. So first of all, welcome to Torah Andalus. If this is the first time you're on this channel, you'll see that we study Torah in a very deep and I hope in an intelligent fashion as well, because the Torah, of course, is the Word of God, and there is nothing more intelligent or nothing more deep than the Word of God. So we try to the extent that we can, understand the Word of God and understand the ideas behind the Torah at a deeper level. So here goes. We're page 42 of the Golden Doves, right? Language, and language alone is a basis of subjectivity. So we said that the very notion of subjectivity that we take for granted, well, you shouldn't take it for granted. It comes because language allows for and is structured in accordance with the idea of subjectivity. For it, meaning language, for it enables man to proclaim himself the subject and declare himself as an I. The very fact that you can say I in a sentence, so now you become the subject of the sentence, right? I will not stand for this, right? Or I want to go for a walk. I. So now you become the subject of a sentence. That idea is profound because it allows us to develop the idea of subjectivity. So through language, we become a subject. Linguistic subjectivity, and now we're going to have Emil Benveniste, creates the category of person. So what he says that it creates the category of person. Now by the category of person, he's referring to the idea that in language and through language, we can distinguish between different types of things in the world. For example, there are animals, there are objects, there are things, and there's also humans, right? Now, within language, these distinctions are expressed through grammatical categories, right? So you have one of the grammatical categories is the person, because you have the first person, the second person, and the third person, right? So what Benveniste is saying is that the grammatical category of person itself impacts our understanding of ourselves and of the world around us, right? So whenever you construct a sentence, I want to go for a walk, right? You're creating a sense of self through that sentence, because now you're the subject. And through the process of constructing these sentences where you're the subject, you're also shaping, or we are shaping, our perception of reality, not just in language, but outside language, right? So, again, I'm reading this sentence again. The linguistic subjectivity creates the category of person both in language, that's obvious, right? But also we believe outside of it as well. So basically what Benveniste is saying is that language allows us, or language affects our perception of ourselves as well as our perception of the world, right? So it's not just that language is self-referential, but it affects our very perception of ourselves and our relationship to the world outside of the sentence, outside of the construction of language, right? Continuing. Before examining the particulars of the category of person, which is what Emil Ben-Venisa was talking about, and we'll deal with the category of person, my father will, that is, later on. It wouldn't be helpful to touch upon the syntagmatic character of language. So syntagmatic is when things, let's say you have two things, and I understand one thing in light of the other, and the other thing in light of the first thing. There's a certain opposition that these two things create. We'll understand that a little more deeply. Ferdinand de Saussure described language. All right, so I'm sorry. So the syntagmatic character of language means that within language, you have these syntagmatic relationships, right? Things exist relative to each other, and each thing becomes a context for understanding each other thing, right? So let's see. Ferdinand de Saussure described language as a system based entirely on the opposition of its concrete units. So first of all, Ferdinand de Saussure was a linguist, and many consider him to be the father of modern linguistics. And what he's saying is that the concrete units in language, right, or the system of language is based on not just the fact that there are concrete units. There's a dog, there's a cat, there's a mouse, there's a house, there's Jack and there's Jill, and they're running up the hill, right? So there's not just concrete units, right? So there's a collection of individual words and a collection of individual sounds. No. Rather, language is a complex, interconnected system where each one of these individual units or concrete units gains meaning through its relationship to the other concrete units, right? So in metaphysical thinking, things just exist. Remember, we discussed metaphysics. So there's the absolute beauty, there's the absolute justice, there's the absolute or perfect triangle, and it just exists. In language, things exist in relationship to other things. So if there is no absolute triangle, the triangle is relative to something else, right? So according to Saussure, the basic units of language are not fixed, objective entities, but rather are defined. The very definition of these units are defined by their relationship to other units within the system, right? But this, by the way, is fundamental to understanding Derashot, because in Derashot, we're trying to understand new syntagmatic relationships, right? So we create these new syntagmatic relationships by putting words in relation to other words. That's exactly what Derashot is. So you have Gezer HaShavat. You could do through Gezer HaShavat. You can say the word exists here, the word exists there, over there it means this, so also over here it means this. You see the syntagmatic, how Derashot plays upon Ferdinand de Saussure's idea of syntagmatic opposition. So all the rules of Derashot are just different ways of creating these interconnections between the words. That's why it's so important to understand modern linguistics, because without that you really don't fully appreciate the depth of the thinking of the Chachamim, right? All right. So basically what Ferdinand de Saussure was saying, just to maybe summarize that part, is that language is based on a system of opposition. And he's saying, focus away from the meaning of individual words, right? And look at the interdependency of the words within the system, within the language, within the sentence, within the paragraph, right? Language must be conceived as a linguistic sign, says my father now. In isolation is void of signification. I said, if you just have one word, say you have the word dog, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, it meaning what? What about the dog, right? Just, you could say dog. If a person says dog, well, what about it? This person, banana. What? Tell me something, right? Language must be conceived as a type of algebra consisting solely of complex terms. So also in algebra, you have these complex terms that have meaning relative to each other. X squared plus, plus 3x minus 10 is, so x in that context is not the same thing as, 3x squared minus 15x plus 5, right? X, the meaning of x, or the definition of x, changes from equation to equation. That's the way it is in language. Linguistic signs do not function through their intrinsic value, but through their relative position, right? So a linguistic sign doesn't have an actual, what is the value of x? There's no absolute value of x. Similarly, there's no absolute value of a word unless it has within the context of the sentence, it gains its meaning. Employing a most apt metaphor, Saussure compared language to a chess game in which the value of the pieces depends on their position on the chessboard. Right? If you have a queen and the queen has no place to go because it's blocked by pawns, I don't know, the value of that queen is nothing or very little. Whereas if you have the queen well positioned in the chessboard with free access and free motion, then that queen could be very valuable, right? So the value of the pieces on a chessboard depends on the overall relationship of all the pieces to each other. Just like each linguistic term derives its value from its opposition to all other terms, so it is in language. Every word in the sentence gains a meaning based on all the other words in the sentence.